Morning everybody. Right, today I am going to talk about the new Porsche Taycan because I think it looks like a really interesting vehicle, and they've taken a bit of a different approach to things than Tesla, and they are aiming for very much the same kind of prospective customer. So I think that's probably partly why Tesla is trotting out their new Plaid drivetrain, you know, the super high performance drivetrain Model S that they've currently got. They've got a prototype version at the Nürburgring. They've done Laguna Seca, I believe, in a record time. So Tesla is trying to rise to the challenge, probably more than rise to the challenge if I'm being honest, but we'll talk about the new version of Model S with the super duper out of this world performance. That'll be another day. Today we're going to focus on the Porsche. Straight off the bat, one thing I can tell you is this Porsche is beautiful. I am a big fan. I remember when I first saw the original prototype version, which was called Mission E, and we saw the sort of pictures from the, I think it was 2015, the Frankfurt Motor Show, where it was first sort of unveiled, and at the time I thought, wow, that looks stunning. Bet we'll never see a production version of that anytime soon. But you know what? The Taycan actually does look quite similar to the original prototype. That's a win as far as I'm concerned. And that is something that I do think the Porsche's got over, say, a Model S. Don't get me wrong. I think the Tesla Model S is an absolutely stunning car. And it's got a very classic look that has aged very well. But what the Model S doesn't have is much in the way of a refresh to its look over the last, heading in the direction of 10 years. I mean, yes, they've done the new front fascia and that does make a difference. And there are other little sort of cosmetic tweaks here and there. But by and large, it's very recognisably the same car. Whereas, obviously, the Porsche is brand new, although it does take some styling cues from the Panamera to some extent, and obviously the other Porsches in the lineup as well, things like the headlights with the LEDs, the daylight running lights. That's very Porsche, of course, as you would expect. All in all, I think the design team have done a good job. Apologies if I'm sort of moving around quite a lot in this video. I've got a load of sort of stuff to try and be getting on with. It's the weekend, Soph and Jasper have gone to the skate park, and I'm just trying to sort of tidy the house up a little bit and keep things under control. So the camera is likely to sort of be moving about quite a bit. Now, there are some technical differences between the Porsche and basically every other EV ever created, which are quite interesting. So what they've done is they've gone for an 800 volt architecture, whereas almost all other EVs out there use 400 volts. And this is of interest because 800 volts means in order to get the same amount of power, you need only half the current, which means you can use thinner wires. The power electronics won't heat up as much. The whole system just works more efficiently. It also leads to the possibility of being able to charge the car that much quicker, which is one of the reasons why the car, I believe, can do 270 kilowatts of charging speed when the battery is empty. And this is assuming you can find one of the Porsche chargers, which at the moment is probably quite unlikely. At the same time, it is quite interesting as a potential future direction for EVs to go. That's one of the things I've been doing today. Taking the pool down and trying to get it sort of clean enough to be packed up and put away. Quite a big job, really. So with this new architecture, Porsche is thinking they can probably charge the car from 5% to 80% in as little as 22.5 minutes, which is astounding. Again, you are going to have to find one of those rare 270 kilowatt Porsche proprietary connector chargers, so yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be one of those things that either all EVs are going to wind up going to an 800 volt architecture, or it probably isn't going to survive long term, but it is very interesting nonetheless. Now when it comes to performance, The Porsche Taycan has got a dual motor setup, all-wheel drive. They've got a motor on the front axle and one on the rear. The rear axle motor is interesting because it actually feeds into a 2-speed gearbox. So you've got a sort of low range gearing, which is good for acceleration, provides a huge amount of oomph at the beginning. Good for about, I think if you get the Turbo S, they're talking 2.8 seconds, 0 to 62, which is very good. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Not sure, I can't remember exactly what the figure was for the Just Turbo. So at the moment, I think there's two versions which are confirmed, the Turbo and the Turbo S. Ugh, time for a coffee break. So the Taycan's got 4 doors, and there is talk of a crossover version coming down the line, and also a convertible version as well is supposed to be something they're thinking about, all dependent on demand, although I get the impression it's probably going to do quite well. There are plenty of people who will prefer the Porsche version of interior aesthetic to the way Tesla do it, which is quite different. I like the Tesla approach personally, it's fine, but not everyone is going to want to drive exactly the same car from now till the end of time. There are plenty of people who'll be like, nope, I like Porsche, I like German, you know, I've had Porsches before, that's what I want. So I think they're going to sell, and I think they're going to sell very well because the car has got good performance and a reasonable range. Now, talking about range, the battery in this thing is a 93 kilowatt hour battery. Now I believe that's 93 kilowatt hours usable, so in the Tesla world it would be 100 kilowatt hours. But here's the thing, it only gets a 220 odd to 270 mile range, and that's on the WLTP driving cycle, so real world is probably going to be a smidge lower than that, which in this day and age it's not as much as you would like. Now it does have permanent magnet motors on those axles, so that does help improve efficiency. And it's got the 800 volt system, which also will improve efficiency. The coefficient of drag is middling, I would say, for a sports car that's powered by batteries. It's a coefficient of drag of 0.22 for the Turbo and 0.25 for the Turbo S, which is obviously designed with a bit more of a handling sort of focus. And that's one of the things where I think Porsche does have a chance of standing out against a car like the Model S. The Model S, everyone knows, it's virtually unbeatable in a straight line. You need to spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds on a hypercar with a tiny little seat and basically no luggage room whatsoever. And then, yes, okay. But other than that, the Model S wins. We've all seen the drag races on YouTube. It's a foregone conclusion. However, it's not so great at going round a track, which is where I think the new version of the Model S comes in, but more on that another day. So range I do think is probably one of the weaker points for this car, but it's still perfectly acceptable. I mean, we're still talking about a solid 150 miles of range no matter what the weather does at any time of the year. And that is enough if the charging infrastructure is in place to get your car recharged in a reasonable amount of time and back on the road. You could quite, I mean, I drove all the way to northern Italy and we stopped every 150 odd miles. I don't think we did any legs that were longer than that, and it was actually quite nice and relaxing. We didn't stop for that long when we did stop, but it's amazing how quickly, you know, kids in the back of the car need the loo, or you want to stretch your legs. I tell you something, driving is actually much more comfortable if you get out of the driving seat every few hours and just stretch your legs, even if it's just for 5-10 minutes. Just lets the blood recirculate and lets all the muscles sort of stretch and tendons sort of, you know. I definitely recommend doing that personally. I know not some people want to, like, I'm just going to motor through, like make it some kind of torture test of manhood. But I think that's stupid, and nobody's really impressed that you can sit in a seat in agony for 5 hours. I digress again. Something I do find quite interesting about the Taycan, when I looked at the press shots, you know, the sort of video that is available as a press kit, it makes quite an interesting sound. I suspect they've done that deliberately to try and give it a bit more of a interesting feel for people who really want that driving sensation. And that is the thing, right? You've got Porsche who have worked on the suspension and the handling and all the rest of it, and I suspect, I've not driven one, but I suspect it will have quite good handling. It's got a battery that's very low in the chassis, so it's going to have that classic EV low center of gravity, which if you get the suspension and tires and wheels all set up right, can lead to a very glued on the road sort of feel. Just before I go back inside, a quick note. Lots of people have said they want an update on my robot mower, and one will be coming relatively soon. Bilbo is still alive and well. Yeah, it's good, but more on that in another day. I've just had an interesting call from Sophie. Not interesting, we're going out to lunch, so I have to jet off and do that in just a second. But before I do that, I want to talk about the interior, because the interior is quite interesting on the Taycan. Okay, so you know Tesla, right? They've gone for, especially with the Model 3, one big screen. They're a big fan of the one big screen concept. Porsche have gone totally the other direction. They've probably got more actual total square footage of screen in this thing. I think there's 4 separate displays. There's a climate control one, a sort of main navigation one, a dashboard one, and then a passenger one as well, I think. Well, I have a feeling that might be an option. There's still some things that I'm not 100% sure on with this. What I really want to do is actually get my hands on a Taycan to have a proper test with it. So I need to try and get in contact with Porsche and see if they'll lend me one. You never know. You don't ask, you don't get. But it's quite a nice, refined interior. It's certainly got a lot more stuff to play with and look at than, say, the Model S has. Right, I think that's probably all the time I'm gonna have round here for talking and videoing and stuff like that. So I'm gonna collect up my belongings and head out for lunch. I'm a good robot, doing the work for me, which is why I can go out to lunch. It's making a fair amount of noise, isn't it? I'll tell you something, I do hope Porsche is successful with the Taycan, because I love the fact that these days more and more of the sort of not specifically electric vehicle car manufacturers are embracing EVs. And by embracing, I mean actually producing them and meaning to sell them, not just, oh, we've designed one and then we left it in a dark garage somewhere, so yeah, you've got no chance of buying it. A lot of that does come down to access to actual batteries, I think, but that will become less of a problem as time goes on. It's all very encouraging, the direction the EV industry has been going. I think at least part of the reason why it's doing so well. Do I need to pay for parking? Nope, I don't need to pay for parking. It's free on Sunday. I do think a large part of the reason why car manufacturers are being a bit more serious with their EV plans is because they are being forced to. The good old European Union, which I do think is an absolutely fantastic institution, has been mandating, well, they have mandated, and it comes in, I believe, in 2020, that car manufacturers need to have a certain CO2 emissions across their whole fleet, which means it's not enough to just say, well, I designed an EV and I sold 10 of them. You actually need to shift a decent number of them. Otherwise, you'll find yourself lumped with some pretty hefty fines. I also think that as car manufacturers produce compelling EVs, they will find that they are not just cannibalizing their own sales of what would have previously been diesel vehicles or petrol. What they're also doing is taking customers from the companies that don't have a good electric vehicle offering. I guess we'll see how that goes in time. Hopefully the sales will come, and hopefully Porsche will continue to make great EVs. Hello, Trouble!
Hello, babe.
I've just come out here quickly because there's a couple of other things that I wanted to quickly add, which I've forgotten to. Firstly, the Taycan is sort of 37% aluminium, so there's sort of steel structural components, and the battery forms part of the structure of the car. And I think this is kind of quite important. The panels will all be aluminium. And I know from personal experience with my Tesla that aluminium does have a tendency to make repair costs more expensive, so that is something. On the upside, what they've done with the batteries, they've actually put like a little gap where the rear passenger seat's feet would go, so that they've got a better sort of headroom and a more comfortable leg position on that back row. I think that was it. I think that was the last thing that I wanted to say about the Taycan. So it's now basically time for me to say goodbye for the day. I hope you enjoyed today's vlog post. If you have, remember to like it, share it, subscribe if you haven't already, follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you don't already, and I'll see you in the next episode of my vlog. Bye. But at the same time, it is quite interesting as a potential at the same time it is quite... Yeah, I'm not in shot at all. That's never going to work. It's there. Anyway, I'm diverging. I'm going to chop, cut, snip, snip. This is all going in the outtake section at the end of the video.